Well, once again, welcome to the long arm room here in Studio One. Before I go into what I call my prep for loading, I thought I'd go over a little thing I've got about irons. It didn't take long to find a workhorse, and that was the Sunbeam, and it's a model 19800. They did one of those things where if it's not broke, don't fix it. They fixed it. And they came out with a new model that improved this surface, but it didn't improve the iron. The first one, this was the second one. The first one shocked me. And I mean, pretty good. It wasn't a heart-starting shock, but it was a shock. So it was retired immediately. I contacted Sunbeam via their website. I got no response, no help, no nothing. So I said, well, I'm not going to continue to use this. And I went on a search for a new iron. And after trying a lot of different irons in a lot of different little places, other quilters, other long armors, I went with the Electrolux. It was twice as much as the replacement for the Sunbeam, but it did the job of what I called the workhorse. I used 2 of these irons in 11 years. The first one of these lasted about a month. I don't know how long this one will last or if I ever have to use it because it's a backup. If this one goes out, I'll get another one. But this one's 60, this one's 30 and change, and this one was 25 and change. This one is still in service. Instead of having to unplug this and take it over to the long arm, I got an ironing station set up right behind the long arm so that if I do need an iron, when I've got a quilt on the long arm, the iron is right there. If I go off camera, I apologize. So that's in regards to irons, that's it. And I recommend the Electrolux, and I use steam, and this puts out a lot of steam, and it's really good for me. Now, why do I care about a good iron? And I'm not going to pay $200 for an Aliso or a Rowenta. I press every quilt top, and I iron every quilt back. And the quilter pays nothing for that because I think that's part of my job to make what I do when I'm done complement their quilt. They ironed it, they pressed it, then they folded it and they put it in a closet, or they folded it and hung it on a hanger, or they folded it and put it in a box and shipped it to me. So it's going to have creases and it's going to have wrinkles. So I press the back, I press the top, and I iron the back. And this particular quilt is the quilt that's going to be loaded next. So I'll probably continue this video into the next segment, which is loading the back on the long arm, the way I load it back. I'm going to show you how I measure. I know some people use a tape. Excuse me. You saw my other shirt, coffee, long arm, nap, repeat. Well, I think that's the 3rd or 4th cup of coffee. Some people will take a tape and they just hold up the quilt at the edge and then they run the tape along and they hold it and then they move on. I can't do that. Number one, more than likely you're going to end up stretching the top and get an inaccurate measurement. And I don't want a measurement that's not natural. That's not what I consider to be natural. The top just laying on a flat surface. Starting with the small numbers, I measure at the first seam. I don't measure at the top. I measure at the first seam. I believe I get a more accurate measurement because that's where the least amount of stretch is going to occur when I get it laid out and smoothed out. You can get a top up here at the edge can be wider than at the first seam just because of the way it was cut. Not everything is cut absolutely straight. It doesn't happen. And it's not a big deal. I mean, it just sometimes it just doesn't happen. So that's how I measure. So in this case, at this end, because I don't know if this is the top or the bottom, and I'll explain that as we go, is 65.5 inches. And once again, I just lay it out, let it lay naturally. I'm probably off camera, and again, I apologize if I go off camera like that. I measure it, same thing, real close to the seam. And this is 66. So 65.5 on one end and 66 on the other end, and that is not uncommon. That's not a big deal. I record that. 66 is now the top, and the 65.5 is now the bottom. I load the widest end at the top because as I long arm, I've noticed over the last 11 plus years, there's a little bit of, I'm going to call it shrinkage. It wants to pull in because you're putting a lot of stitching in, and it pulls it in a little bit. If you put you might not have this problem, but if I put the wide end at the bottom, and I don't keep it as straight as I can going down the sides as I quilt, and it pulls in a little bit. When I get down to the bottom, I've got more waviness than what you might have in a normal situation. So I use the wide end as the top. So that means that now this is the top, and the top in my house, when I'm measuring a quilt and setting it up and all that good stuff, the top becomes this end. The top is on the closest to the little kitchenette. That's where the top is, so I don't lose track of the top. I know which side is going to be left when I get it loaded. I know which side is going to be right, and I'm going to have the measurements for all of those, all four sides, documented, and I will know what is going to have to be done as I go down and do the quilting. If one side is longer than the other, I've got to make a little bit of an adjustment along the way somewhere so that when I get to the bottom, it is relatively straight from left to right. And the measurement is as close as I can make it in regards to the length from top to bottom, that both sides are relatively the same. In this case, this is the top, that makes this the left side, is 82. One more time, just lay it out flat, just let it lay naturally. Don't put tension on it, don't unnecessarily pull it tight. You don't have to do that. Again, I'm measuring as close as I can to that seam so that that's the least amount of stretch is going to happen, and it's a more accurate measurement, in my opinion. And in this case, it's 81.5. So it is a ½ inch longer on the left than it is on the right. So as I quilt, I want to make sure I keep that in mind, and I will allow that longer side, I'll just loosen it up just a little bit, just feather in that difference. So those are all recorded. Then after I'm done with pressing the top, which I'm not going to do on camera here, we don't need to watch me press a top. After I'm done pressing the top, then I'll set up the back, lay the back out, and I do measure the back. I measure it width and length. I've only had one short back in all of my long arming. and I mean short in regards to the fact that when I got down to the bottom, I actually had to reposition it with the red snappers. I needed like another inch, and it was just a little bit too short. Instead of it being 5 inches all the way around, or 10 inches longer, 10 inches wider, it was like 6. And when I got down to the bottom, I needed just a little bit more, 6 inches longer, 6 inches wider. Now the top for this one is a pieced, the back is a pieced back, and it is pieced vertically, which is, it can be an issue. I don't think it will be an issue on this one. The piecing is not that crucial, let's say. It doesn't have to be ripped down or anything. It looks like I've got what did I say the back was? The top was? I've got a 66-inch top, and this looks like it's 74, 75, which is going to be sufficient. I would love it to be 76. I really like having 5 inches extra all the way around. I can work all the way down to 3. If it's less than 3, I'm going to send it back to the quilter to be added to. And in regards to adding to it, I don't care if you add muslin to it, just again, I'm going to need more width. So this is 73 1/4 wide. So that gives me 10, I've got about 7.5 inches, so I'll be able to work with that. It does make it a little bit more difficult to do, because you have to be very, very aware of the tension that you're putting on the quilt itself in regards to left and right. If I have to use side tension, I don't always have to use side tension, but this one probably, because it's a vertical seam. Horizontal seam, that's usually not an issue. So it should be about the same. This looks like it's going to be the same width, top and bottom. And it is. Now, the length, I really only take one length measurement, and that's usually, I just lay it out and do it down the middle. I just want to make sure it's long enough. Usually, more than likely, it is always, not always, usually it is longer than the 10 inches. If it's, and in this case, we are looking at, what am I looking at, 90? Almost 90. So it's not 10. It would be 92, it would be 10, so it's 8, but I can work with 8. I can work with 8, and I can work with the 7.5 on the width. Not ideal, but then being ideal in quilting is almost impossible. It's not rocket science, so it's not like we have to absolutely positively have to be spot on. So that is, now this will be ironed, the top will be pressed, and then I will load the back, and I will probably videotape loading this back. because number one, because it has vertical seams, I'll be able to show you what those seams do when you roll it up and why we prefer horizontal. And it's a pretty good size, so it'll give you an idea of how I load it and why I use the leaders I use and why I have my equipment set up the way it's set up. Here we go, a little over 15. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for viewing the My Way series, and have an absolutely fabulous day. And quilt till you wilt. We do.